Right. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Instagram. I think we're good to go. Happy Halloween, everybody. Happy Halloween, October 31, 2024, episode 295. Welcome to Mornings with Scott, the best damn business show for medium and small businesses on the planet. What are you going dressed as for Halloween today? Anyone know? Maybe throw it in the comments if you want to tell us. I've had pictures. Actually, I'm not going to tell you what somebody sent me pictures of this morning. It may not even be appropriate. Hey, Ashley, welcome to the show on LinkedIn. Thank you for letting me know the sound is great. Well, I'm self-identifying as a piece of garbage today for Halloween. If you know, you know. If you don't know, well, you're going to learn later in this show. Let's see what we have today. You and I are going to learn today together because, frankly, I got up an hour later than I should have for some reason today on this dark and gloomy morning where I am, and so we'll see. We'll see how prepared everything is. I don't even have all my headphones in. Let's see if this adjusts. But thanks for letting me know the sound is good. Ashley, the loonie, according to Bloomberg, the loonie. What is a loonie? Some of you U.S. Audience, international audience asked. That is the Canadian dollar is trading at lows not seen in years. And here's what that means for Canadians. Again, according to the Canadian Press and Bloomberg. Adam Button, chief currency analyst with Forex Live. Do you know what I think is not a thing? A Forex analyst, a chief currency analyst. I don't know. I don't know if I'm into that. We'll see. But anyways, this fellow, Adam Button, says that the Canadian dollar has fallen to its lowest level since 2020 with rate cuts coming and a U.S. election on the horizon. There's every reason to think that the Canadian dollar is going to crash even more. Yesterday it was below 72 cents. US on a US CAD to US dollar comparison, of course, for the first time in more than 4 years. The lower loonie should help industries. Like this is the thing. Like whether this is good or bad depends entirely on what you're doing with your Canadian dollars. If you're in tourism, if you live, let's say, on a border town like I do, and it's cool to have US residents who earn their money in US dollars come up and spend their money in your Canadian dollar tourist town, well, it's cheap for them. And so that helps you a lot. If you're going the other way, if you're a Canadian tourist and you're heading to Miami to check out the Halloween costumes that were sent to me this morning, then it's going to cost you more money. It's going to cost you a lot more money because you're making your money in Canadian dollars and you're going to go spend it in US, and it's going to cost you another 20% more than you think it ought to. Well, 10% more. If you're a Canadian, you think to yourself, what's a normal Canadian to US dollar exchange rate? And you think 85% somewhere, 8 cents, somewhere in that range. So every US dollar, a Canadian dollar is worth like 85 cents. And if the CAD is worth more than that, then you think, wow, Canadian dollar is really strong. And if it's worth less than that, like it is right now, you say, well, the Canadian dollars, we suck. We just suck. So what's driving the currency down, according to this? What do they call this guy again? A chief currency analyst? I'm telling you, I think that's a made-up title. The biggest driver of the split between the CAD and the U.S. dollar is the diverging economic outlooks and the interest rate decisions linked to those. That's because the higher the central bank interest rate, the more worthwhile it is to hold that country's currency. So they're saying it's tied to interest rates, which is true. If you want to invest in currency, if you want to invest in a US dollar or a Canadian dollar, the interest that you get on that makes a big deal. Is that a huge deal? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's a big deal. The Canadian economic growth is looking weaker than the US, and the Bank of Canada cut its key interest rates, which we talked about on this show. What was that? A couple of weeks ago. So they've cut that down. And there's thinking that they may have to cut it down further because the economy is dead under the Trudeau government, and particularly if you're in the middle part of the country or the extreme coast of the country, you're in serious trouble. Not necessarily in downtown Toronto or Montreal, but in these other places, things are not looking very good. Whereas the U.S. economy is more resilient, largely because they're pumping out cash from the government. So that, which is now more than 50% of the economy, shockingly. And so the assumption is that the U.S., the Fed, is not pressured to lower interest rates. In fact, there's discussion that they lowered them too much last time, and there may even have to be a rate rise. We don't know. Crude prices have fallen recently down below $70 a barrel, and that weighs on the loonie. Look at the Canadian dollar. I want to do a deep dive onto this and think about it more. If you're doing business in the U.S. and you're working into Canada, the exchange rate is a huge issue. If you're a Canadian manufacturing company, guaranteed you export because the market here is not really big enough, and the currency is a major issue. And the Canadian currency, my whole career has been really tied simply to oil and commodity prices. To me, I've always said the Canadian dollar is like the penny stock of currency. There's not a ton of volume, comparatively speaking. Nobody really cares. We're a small country, and we are resource rich. And so our welfare is tied to the price of those resources, which would be oil and other commodities used for industrial purposes. And so he's saying that oil is down, and that's a reason. To me, that's even a bigger driver than interest rates. We shall see. But there's also an election coming up. So there's just this, as usual with financial markets, a laundry list of reasons that may or may not have anything to do with the fact that the dollar is falling. So what is the Outlook Scotiabank analyst Hugo St. Marie said in a recent note that he's been bearish for some time on the loonie, the Canadian dollar, the director of portfolio and quantitative strategy. So this guy sounds like an economist. It does not sound like a made-up term. Said that it could result in low interest rates. That the dollar could drop to lows of the past 2 decades, such as in 2020 and 2016 when the loonie neared 68 cents. 68 cents. By the way, I owned we had bought in the late 90s. That was my first public company takeover, and Applied Carbon, it was called. And so we took over this public company and did some tricky financial stuff in Canada, which was awesome, and inherited the second largest manufacturer or processor of graphite flake in the United States in upstate New York, outside of Buffalo. I can't think of the name of that small little town right now. Anyways, I used to own that outright, and it was losing. It was losing about $300,000 a month at a time when I didn't have all that much money. So I had to run around the world and raise more than $300,000 a month. And when I say run around the world, I lived in Toronto, Canada at the time. So a lot of that was sort of up and down Bay Street. And that was at a time when I was trying to raise money in Canadian dollars, and I was losing money in US dollars. And the dollar was at like 68 cents. It was horrible. If the dollar had been at 80 cents, like it ought to have been, I would have been much better off. I would have to raise less money. But it was at 68 cents, and it almost killed me. I did it though. I raised all that money, and ultimately we were able to exit that situation. So Hugo St. Marie from Scotiabank expects the Canadian dollar will bounce back next year, but this year it's going to suck, basically is what he's saying. Here's the more economic way to say that. We continue to see more downside risk than upside risk going forward. Okay, so there was a post on X from somebody I follow, and if I'd been more prepared, I didn't wake up late this morning, I would have given you this person's name so that you could follow him too. So apologies for that, but he's a Canadian economist and financial guy. He says he's agreed that a Trump win will be bad for Canada and our currency. The Canadian dollar could fall below 70 cents if Trump wins. I posted back, now Trump equals commodity increases, which equals Canadian dollar increases. If you create a demand in the US and a stronger economy that is not government focused, that is actually pulling resources, that's great for Canada. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create financing opportunities. It's going to drive up the prices of commodities and make mining a profitable venture. And that's going to increase the Canadian dollars. That's my view. That's what's going to happen if Trump wins. If Kamala wins, which is what I've told you is going to happen on this show, if she wins, well, that's all bets are off. I just think everything's going to go down the toilet. So What does all this mean to you? This is a business show. If you export goods, as I said, you're never cheaper to your customers, right? If you're selling something for $100 Canadian, and the dollar's at 80 cents US, well, Americans have to pay 80 cents to buy of their currency to buy your $100 good. If it's at 70 cents, well, they have to pay 70 cents. So it's a more than a 10% discount. I can't really do that off the top of my head. I'm just drinking my first coffee of the day. Come on, give me a break. I'm trash right now. I'm trash. So your goods are cheaper. If you can't succeed in this economy, if you're an exporter, then something is wrong with you. And by the way, do not build your business plan all around this idea of normalization that that this is where the dollar is going to be. That's a bad idea. Build your business plan around margins at an 80, 85 cent Canadian dollar. If you're just a normal person and you want to go on holidays, super expensive to go to the US right now. So think of it that way. Speaking of garbage, of which I am for Halloween, we talked on yesterday's show about about Kamala's closing argument in Washington, where she just called half the country fascists and Nazis, but then she was outdone by Biden, who called Trump supporters garbage. Well, that was 2 days ago. I covered it on the show yesterday. Yesterday's entire news cycle was not about business, was not about things that are useful to us. Instead, it was the Biden administration cleaning up this comment and saying he did not, in fact, call Trump supporters garbage. He said, and here was the direct quote, by the way, of what he said. He said, quote, "The only garbage I see is Trump supporters," end quote. Okay, the only garbage I see. Can I take my bag off now? This is getting very, very hot. Oh, enough of that Halloween comment. The only garbage I see is Trump supporters. I want to picture that sentence in your head, written out, because it turned into a really big deal yesterday. To which the White House said, "No, you missed the apostrophe. You missed the apostrophe at the end of supporters, which would have made that possessive, which means that." The only garbage I see is Trump supporters. Possessive, meaning it's the Trump supporters garbage. The things that they say is crap, is garbage, is trash. Not the supporters themselves, because you miss the apostrophe. I know the apostrophe is silent, but if you'd seen it in my head, the apostrophe was there. It would have been possessive. So then yesterday in the news cycle, there's surrogates everywhere on CNN, CNBC, all over X, all over everywhere saying, "Damn it, there was an apostrophe that made that possessive." Wait, do you think that's true? I have to admit, and that never even occurred to me when I heard it. I just heard, "You're garbage." That's what I heard. And other commentators who I trust, I think, are being honest. It never occurred to them the other way around. They were blind to the fact that to what I heard and what most people heard is that Biden called these supporters garbage. What they heard in their head was the possessive apostrophe. Like, what? How is that possible? Well, the answer is priming, confirmation bias. This is important when you're doing pitches. It's important in business. It's important in life. You hear what you want to hear. I'm not really pro-Republican, pro-Trump, all that sort of stuff. I've never come out on this show. I don't want to talk about the politics of it on this show, but I am definitely, from a policy perspective and an investment and business perspective, definitely anti-Biden, anti-Kamala Harris, because I think they're just disasters all around for business and for the working people. So I've been anti that. So I'm primed to hear negative things come out of them. And so it never even occurred to me that there may have been a possessive apostrophe at the end of the day. And other commentators say, well, obviously that's what he was saying. I don't know. What do you think? Confirmation bias is the answer to that. But I did an X post on this yesterday, and I said, if your pitch is hanging on the apostrophization, you've lost. Like, why are we having this debate in communication about whether there was a possessive apostrophe or not? Just terrible handling by the by the Harris Biden group. Meanwhile, Trump being Trump, is campaigning in Wisconsin yesterday in a garbage truck. He's got an orange vest over his suit. He's got a garbage man's orange protective vest over his suit. He's driving around literally in a garbage truck, waving out the window like the Queen. It was awesome. It was awesome. All right, enough of the garbage. But speaking of the election, let's move on to our favorite evil company, Dominion Voting Machines. Who is Dominion Voting Machines? Dominion Voting Machines is a voting systems, actually, not machines, is a major provider of voting machines and election technology servicing over 28 U.S. states, including key markets like Georgia, Michigan, Arizona. Originally founded in Canada, that would be right in downtown Toronto, I believe, in 2002. Now operates globally with headquarters in Denver, Colorado, and Toronto. Privately owned by Staple Street Capital, a very large private equity firm out of New York that has significant political connections. I think that's the key to it. So as noted on the show last week, Dominion, who I have suggested here, and firmly believe is really in the business of messing with elections, not an accusation, my personal belief, messing with elections and then suing people who complain about it for big bucks. They're in the what is that? Is that green mail? Is that blackmail? Is that extortion? I don't know what that is, but they just sue everybody and get large settlements out of them on defamation cases. I don't think I'm saying anything wrong there. That's my judgment, but I've read the statement of claims, so that's what I think is going on. And as I noted on the show last week, they did a press release or something on their website, which I provided the link. You can go back and find that they threaten anyone that questions the election. That's what the note said. It said, so we're going to have an election, and if you question us, if you say that we're cheating or things are going wrong with our system, well, we're going to be monitoring that and we're going to hold you accountable. And then there was a hot link to all of their lawsuits and the pleadings and everybody that they've sued. So that's a pretty good message, right? They're just going to sue you if you question what's going on. Well, yesterday, that was what we covered before. Well, yesterday, Michigan Secretary of State released or was in a press conference, and Michigan Secretary of State released yesterday an issue with the machines. This is Dominion Voting Machines that they had problems in testing. They had like where the election's Tuesday, and they're testing them, and it failed. Quote, this is a nationwide issue with Dominion voter access terminals. Not all the machines, just the ones that are accessible. That sounds like all the machines to me. They have an issue with a straight party voting and a programming issue that, again, affected the machines nationwide, end quote. Not me saying that. That is the Michigan Secretary of State. So what I think that means, I took from other X posts, and I don't want to be held to this, but what I think that means when it says straight party voting is there's a ballot with a bunch of, obviously the president, but other stuff, and you want to vote Republican throughout. I think there's an option on the voting machine to do that, and it doesn't work. And specifically what some people said, this is anecdotal, I'm not saying it's true, but what some people said is that it put Republican throughout except for the presidential part of the ticket where it chose Kamala Harris and not Trump. So that's what they're saying. And this comes from the Michigan Secretary of State. What are the point of voting machines? Have you ever thought about that? What was, they're slower, right? Do you remember when we used to have an election and you'd stay up late and you'd watch CNN or ABC or somebody who back in the day seemed a little credible? Excuse me, somebody who seemed a little credible, and you watched them till like midnight or 2 a.m, and it was exciting, and you were having drinks, and then you find out who won. That's how elections used to work. And now we don't have a voting day. People have been voting for like weeks already in the US, and this will continue on late, not only late into the night, but late into probably into mid-November. And there's going to be lawsuits and protests. Well, like the voting machines do not help the system. They are slower. They have to be more expensive. How much does it really cost to county by county or even smaller geographical areas, set up a polling station and have a table being monitored and to hand count the ballots? Like, it can't cost that much. And instead, we're spending money on these expensive machines that seem to provide no value and have all sorts of glitches and problems. And there's maintenance and upgrades and everything like when you own your PC. So it's a real problem. Sorry, here I'm choking on my coffee. And so I don't know what the point is. There's no audit trail. There's absolutely no audit trail. You can't go back as an observer or in court and say, yeah, here's the paper ballots and we can re-audit those. That doesn't happen. How do you know? It's all in the system. There's no way to audit that. And if you can't audit something in a system, then there's no credibility. They're probably hackable. I don't know how true it is, but I've seen people on social media actually hack into these systems. And then I saw other people fact check that, say that those were old systems and this and that and the other thing. But I mean, what is not hackable? Can't you hack just basically everything these days? Right? I mean, do the election boards have enough money to put up encrypted systems and firewalls and whatever tech people do to protect just these Dominion voting machines? I'm not really buying that. So I don't understand the point. What is the point other than possibly to manipulate things? That's what I'm wondering. Jeffrey Hiscock, give Trump props for the energy that he possesses. Oh, 100%. Working to turn lemons into lemonade by landing at the airport in Wisconsin and jumping into a garbage truck. Anything clarifying his position on Puerto Rico. Tony Hinchcliffe is a rock star roast comedian, and that's what is expected. Mr. Hiscock, thank you for joining the show. And as always, just saying things positive. That's one of the reasons I love Jeffrey. I called you yesterday, by the way, Jeff. I called you. Touch base with me today. I was just wanted to shoot the shit. And one of the things I wanted to shoot the shit about was this next story. Bridging finance executives, David and Natasha Sharp committed fraud, according to an OSC tribunal. Now, this is a 2 or 3 day old story in the Globe and Mail, but somehow I missed it. And I don't want to miss that. David and Natasha Sharp, the husband and wife who ran Bridging Finance Inc. So Bridging Finance was a Canadian private debt lender. What is private debt? You run a business, you're in mid-market, even smaller, you can't get money from the bank, you go find this product. Private lenders, one of my primary products. I love this product. But if you can't get money from the bank, you can go to these financial firms and get money for them, tied to your receivables, tied to your inventory, tied to your equipment, potentially real estate. So it comes from private lenders. And Bridging Finance was one of those in Canada, and then they blew up. And now the OSC, the Ontario Securities Commission, has found them guilty of fraud. That is not the same, by the way, as the police finding them guilty of fraud. Talk about that in a second. The tribunal also found that the Sharps obstructed the Ontario Security, the OSC's investigation by making false or misleading statements during examinations. So that would be lying under oath. And that Mr. Sharp attempted to intimidate witnesses by sending profanity-laden, insulting, and threatening text messages and voicemails. So he was calling up his borrowers and his former employees and leaving them voicemails with a bunch of swearing in it and text messages, just trying to intimidate them over this process. You know, this guy, David Sharp, is a bit of a loose cannon, and his wife, whew. Mr. Sharp said in an email statement he will appeal the decision. Okay, so the Ontario Securities Commission is a government body, and I have been long of the view that there's a lot of corruption within the OSC. And I don't mean corruption like payoff corruption. I'm not trying to suggest that. I'm sure they're all strong, well-meaning bureaucrats. What I mean is a systemic corruption. So they are the regulator for all things securities matters. And then what they do is they have an investigation process, and they are the investigators. And then they decide to charge whoever they're going after based on the regulations that they wrote and the investigations that they did against their own regulations. And then they charge this person, and then they go to quote unquote court. But the court is a panel of OSC people. So they write the law, they enforce the law, and they adjudicate the law. All the same people, and like they're working in the office or cubicle. The judge, the so-called panelist, is working in the cubicle or the office next to the investigator person. I don't know. It's a pretty sketchy situation, and the evidence for that, don't take my word for it, is what happens next is it gets appealed to a real court because you have the right to do that. Now you're appealing, and so that doesn't have the same power as if you went to a real court right away, because what the court is going to do is they're going to give some deference to the OSC panel, say, well, they're a quasi judicial kind of thing, and so who is it for us to say that they're wrong? Except OSC rulings get overturned in court all the time, because the OSC is flawed in its system, right? So that's what happens. And for sure, that's what's going to happen here. Bridging is going to appeal this. These people are going to appeal this. Bridging used to manage $2.09 billion on behalf of 26,000 investors. So Bridging went to the retail market to get money. What does that mean? Well, most of the time, these investors, these finance firms, they get their money from somebody else. It's not like some bank that has all this money already. They go to a private equity fund or a hedge fund or somewhere, and they get the money into their fund, and then they manage that money by giving out loans to manufacturing businesses, let's say, and then the loans are repaid, and there's a profit, and the management company keeps some of that profit and pays the money plus some more profit back to the original investors, right? Well, these people, in part, or maybe in whole, got their money from the retail market, which means you and me and people that, are managing through their stockbroker or what have you. Just regular people. And regular people need liquidity. I mean, sometimes they want their money back so that they can go and buy some groceries or pay off some debt or get a new car or a cottage property, whatever they want to do with their cash. And so they invest in, say, mutual funds, which did happen. And a mutual fund means that you can get out every single day. That's what a mutual fund is. You can get out every day. There's lots of liquidity. And the mutual fund takes this money and they give it to Bridging, and Bridging locks it into what might be a 1 year, 18-month or 2-year term loan. Okay, so they can't get the money back, but their investors want their money back, and you have this mismatch. Don't invest in private debt as an individual. It doesn't make any sense to me. So the OSC centered its case on 3 business dealings. One is they lent money to a Mr. McCoshen, a Winnipeg businessman who Sharp met in 2015, and over the years they lent him more than $150 million. $150 million for the Alaska Alberta Railway Development Corporation, which was supposed to build a railway from Fort McMurray to Alaska. So that would be for oil sands projects, to ship stuff to a port in Alaska, presumably. And it was going to spur economic development, blah, blah, blah. But it went into receivership. And by the time it went into receivership, this company owed Bridging $208 million after accounting for interest and so on and so forth. And the OSC they found Sharp guilty that Mr. McCoshen sent Mr. Sharp $19.5 million between 2016 and 2019 in the form of kickbacks. So you go to your lender and you say, hey, man, lend me some money and from your fund, and I'll give you some of that money personally. And he also transferred $250,000 to Ms. Sharp. The 19.5 million sent to Mr. Sharp, 18.2 could be traced to investor funds. That's not good. The second dealing had to do with 9 Point Partners Limited, which does not tell you in this story, but they are remember I said they get their money from somewhere else? Well, that's where they get their money from, is these 9 Point Partners people, who I just want to say up front seem to be really good people. I do know some of them. I just think that they were caught up in this. They have all sorts of different managers. And so the article doesn't really go into 9 Point, and I think that is appropriate. But Bridging they had a partnership in this management company with Bridging, and Bridging siphoned $35 million, it says here, of investor money out of the fund and use that to buy out 9 Point personally and their equity in the management company. So I guess I don't understand really how 9 Point skates on this particular issue. Again, I don't think they had anything to do with it. I would never suggest that. And the people I know there seem to be good people. Jeffrey says, I read that 64-page, really beautiful. Love the facts regarding the emotional distress that he was falling onto certain employees through the recorded voicemails, texts, and emails, and then directing people to delete information. Bridging behavior really threw a stick in the smokes for what would otherwise be a wonderful financial product, particularly in Canada. Well, that's where I'm going with this, Jeffrey. That's where I'm going with this. I mean, it's fun to cover fraud and all the horrible things that go on, but there's a point. There's a point for someone who's running a business in Canada and in the U.S. right now. So it's going to be appealed. The article says it says that the RCMP, which is the real cops, that would be your FBI or what have you, have not actually charged these people yet with fraud, and we don't know that they will. Again, I just find the OSC process to be entirely different and will be appealed and may not be legit. PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, is the receiver for this bridging fund, and they're estimated. They said that there's going to be about a 1/3 recovery or less. About $1 billion are going to be lost by investors. That is wrong. I'm not believing that at all. We'll see. PwC is super credible. We'll see what they come up with. But one of the other partners of this was a Jenny Coco, who co-owned Bridging Finance, and she was or is a paving magnate. I think her husband ran it. I don't know the family. I'm not going to make it up, but super wealthy woman. And so she was a partner in Bridging, and her and or Bridging, I think both of them, guaranteed a huge mortgage loan for a condo development on Bloor Street. I think it's right at Yonge and Bloor. And so Bridging, the fund, was caused to be a guarantor on that, which again, I think had personal connections. And what I hear on the street is that fund's going to get wiped out because of that guarantee. So we'll see. So what's the point? What's the point apart from the interesting part of the story? Well, the point is, if you're a business owner in Canada, the private debt market has blown up, and we've talked about that for 3 years on this program and its predecessor podcast. So it's blown up, and it's hard to get money. But what's happening is the U.S. private equity, private debt guys are coming into the market right now. I sense that things are starting to loosen up, and we're getting over this. You know, these regulatory rulings come years after the actual event, and so it's been a dry spell. You know, the manufacturing companies, when they hit a hiccup in Canada, they need this product. It's not optional. I place this product every single day, and it's been tight. All right, I need to wrap up here. I just want to say quickly that Meta and Microsoft, we had some tech earnings yesterday. They were fantastic earnings. Meta earnings per share was $6.03 versus an expected $5.25. Revenue was also up. Microsoft was up on earnings and revenue versus expectations as well. So they've done a terrific job. The great numbers, but the market does not care. Why does the market not care? Slower growth in the future. Both of them indicated that growth is going to slow. This is just a reminder, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow for you, but multiples consist of, let's say, 3 things. One is risk-free rate of return. Second is risk. Third is growth. So what does that mean? Let's say you have a multiple of earnings on like $1 million on a private company, and you have a 8 times multiple being applied to that. Well, what's in the 8? In the 8 is a risk-free rate of return. So if I'm buying that $1 million cash flow stream, I need to compare that to my risk-free rate of return. And then if I'm paying a multiple that implies more than a risk-free rate of return, it's because it has a different risk threshold. Okay, so there's sort of a building up of the discount rate, which is the inverse of a multiple, and then everything above that is growth. So when you start, what's the difference between a 6 times multiple EBITDA multiple on a private company versus an 8 times multiple? It's growth. It's growth because that $1 million of cash flow, you assume that that is stable into infinity. And so if it's not stable, if it's growing every year, then you account for that in the multiple and it's growth. And if you have a tech company, like back during the late 90s, early 2000 tech bubble, and we had just stupid multiples of hundreds of times price earnings multiple. That wasn't because the earnings were worth 100 times. It was because you were assuming a 20% growth into infinity year over year over year, which obviously was not true. Okay. Well, if a tech company says, hey, we're running out of processing power, we need to build bigger factories for generating data for the AI models or the cloud storage, whatever it is that they're throwing all their capital expenditures into, it limits growth. That's what they said. That impacts price because it lowers the multiple or increases the risk of that multiple. That's what's going on there. I'll try to do a better explanation of that for you tomorrow. Hey, don't forget Larry O'Brien's book. There's a link in the notes for you to this show. I am way over time. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been Mornings with Scott. We will see you tomorrow, 8:30 Mountain. Enjoy Halloween tonight.